Well, hello and welcome back to Creative You Podcast. We're in the month of January and I think I have one more holiday party to go to. And I've gotten lots of knitting done and had a lot of fun since I've seen you last. So after the last podcast, I filmed it right before Christmas. I went back and listened to that and I said I must have drank 10 Red Bulls or something. So I don't even drink Red Bulls because I was so hyped up about all of these things that I was going to knit that when I went back and watched that, I barely even had a memory. It's like we got ready for Christmas parties, everything got put in a box, shoved away, and I even forgot. The only thing I remembered that there's a book called First Frost. And anyway, welcome back, returning viewers. Hello, any new viewers. This podcast is a knitting and crocheting podcast out of the Hanover McSherrystown, Pennsylvania area. So I did remember that I wanted to do these stockings out of First Frost book, and it seemed like the perfect Christmas Eve cast on, and my husband and I were snuggled up. We were going to watch a Christmas movie. I got the book out and it called for holding 3 strands of yarn together and doing a knotted cast on. I couldn't find it anywhere. Usually I like a challenge, but I had been up all night the night before finishing that Christmas stocking that I showed you and doing all the different colors. I stayed up all night. I got finished the stocking at 10 a.m. I ran over to the shop, finished it up. The customer came to pick it up right on the dot. So I was tired. Usually Christmas Eve, I'm open 10 a.m. to noon. And I felt like there might be somebody else coming. So I hung around. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through pattern books, thinking about, okay, what do I want to make for 2020 when this gentleman walked in to get a gift certificate for his wife. And he said, "Were you sleeping?" I said, "No, I was looking at pattern books." But I don't think he believed me. He told his wife it looked like it was closed, but the shop is like an elongated rectangle. And when I'm there by myself, I don't leave all the lights on like the big box stores. So Christmas Eve was also our wedding anniversary. I got home around 1, told my husband I have to take a nap. And it's like both of us just left any specialness up to each other, and then no specialness happened. And I had found this movie with our movies called The Greatest Gift or something like that, with Pierce Bronson, Susan Sarandon, and a newbie. It sounded so uplifting. I got this pattern and I couldn't figure out the knotted cast on. And so I just did a regular, and so it's kind of floppy and it's not going to work. The other thing I was worried about was I wanted to do these for my husband, and I was afraid when I got to the Fair Isle point it was going to pull the stocking in too thin, and it did. This pattern is half of a Northern Star, which is kind of neat. So I don't know what I'm going to do, if I'm going to just do them for myself. But I did notice that in some books, sorry, I lost my button. There was a poncho in this book where they also did like half of the Northern Star or pieces of the Northern Star. And I guess I never thought, if you go down here to the bottom, of cutting a Northern Star in half. if my cousins are watching, Diane or Cheryl, hi! They're from Kansas and Omaha, Nebraska, and they came in with their dad, who is my dad's brother, over the Christmas holidays, and I haven't really gotten to enjoy them since we were kids, and it was so fun to reminisce and hear my Uncle Bob talk about when he was a child, talk about grandparents that I really didn't get to know. So he was together with his cousin Andy, and it's funny because the older people get, it's the more they look alike. And he and Andy were talking about when they used to, at Grandpa Brady's house, when they used to climb on the fence, then they would jump on the pigs, and the pigs would squeal and holler and carry on, and they thought it was a blast. But my dad, who was 2 years older, probably would have gotten in trouble for what the younger kids do. Like, are there any firstborns out there? My husband was a firstborn, and he said, you get to be like a patrol person. Because if your younger brothers or sisters get into trouble, you're the one who gets nailed. What were you doing? Why weren't you watching them? So my dad tattletaled, and they got into trouble. But it was so fun. So more on this later. I don't like the way it flails out, but I was surprised that they were watching my podcast. I'm doing this with Katia Cotton Merino, and the blue really looks pretty up along the gray. On here, it kind of looks like just a navy, but it's there. Maybe you can see some of the semi-tonal. You know, one of my pet peeves, I love to watch knitting podcasts, is when somebody shows this beautiful sweater they made and they barely flash it up and it's gone. And I would like to see them hold it up and see more of it. So I was also working on the Garter Stitch Pup sweater, which was out of an interweave knit summer 2007, done with 2 different colors of brown sheep, lamb's pride worsted held together, and then a 3rd color. Now, as I was doing this, I thought, there's no way this is going to fit a little dog. It just isn't. But now that it's finished, I can see it. I lost my big purple button, but here's the neck. You put Velcro there. So once you do that, that's going to be a small, pretty small neck. And then this comes around here. Be nice if I could find a big stuffed animal or a real dog and show it. And then that is going to be Velcroed there and have a fake button. And so once you do that, be really cute on a Dachshund, but it's not the big thing that I thought it was. And I did the lime green as an accent, and we got snow here. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful snow. And I'm hoping that I'm good enough that I can insert some pictures and so that you can see it. Okay, and what is this I'm wearing? This is from Sky with an E at the end to C. I was working on it for a long time out of Katia paint, which is an acrylic blend, and I didn't quite use all the yarn. It's a Peacoat bind off, which is so fun. If you've never done that, you like cast on 3 and then I think bind off 2, and you keep adding, and these are the different colors. It is not blocked yet. And when I cast it on, I made a mistake of doing this area too long. So I might do some kind of embroidery or something there. It needs to be blocked. So hopefully the next show, it will be blocked, and then I can show it to you a little bit better. So I started to get all of these projects done that I had cast on. I was like, look at me, go. But over the Christmas holidays, a woman from Saratoga Springs, Saratoga, New York, stopped in and wanted to do a cable class. So I like this pattern. It's a quick slouch hat by Azure Knits, and it's great to learn cables. You do a smaller needle on the ribbing, I think a 7 and a 9. And this is a discontinued yarn called Europa. Has little tweedy flecks. It's a bulky. And so I didn't want her to knit alone. So we each knitted a cap. And you can get pom-poms fairly cheap on Amazon, like a pack for $13 to $15. They have the little loops on, so you don't have to pay too much. And then I found these almost finished, and I mistook them for Susie Rogers reading mitts, which are a very, very popular pattern on Ravelry, and I couldn't understand why I used a bulky yarn when that pattern calls for a DK yarn. The next day, my husband says, "Did I wake up at 2 o'clock and you were standing there knitting?" Yes, I have chronic hip and back pain, and I often stand up to knit, which people think is peculiar. But then when I looked over last year's list, I saw that these are actually Montgomery mitts by Megan Goodacre, and you do them with a chunky. So they look very similar to Susie Rogers reading mitts, but they're not. And then because I got led astray, I got one a little bigger. But after 2 o'clock, I had all those ends woven in, and I have a nice pair of fingerless mitts, and now I know the pattern. Megan Goodacre. I was reading a bunch of a series of books over the holidays. So what I do, I open the book, I put something heavy on it like an iPad, and then I'm knitting, and then I turn the page. Because some of my customers have said they've had to give up reading, and I'm like, So Janet Oak, who wrote Love Comes Softly and T. Davis Fun, it's maybe 7 or 8 books in the series. And some years back when I was studying how to be a writer, you pick names for your characters that tell you about the character. So the good captain was Captain Goodwind, and the bad captain that stole his ship was Captain Grudge. So Megan, the name Goodacre, could be a name for a farmer who's kind. Just kind of funny. So then I had promised my niece Tori that I would knit her a hat in school colors. She goes to school in Baltimore. Her school colors are yellow and like a Kelly green, a Christmas green, and she wants to fold the brim up, which not everybody does that anymore. And I couldn't resist the urge to get just a little bit fancy, and I did it with Encore Chunky, and she was so excited. I felt bad because I hadn't finished it. I'm at my mom and dad's Christmas party casting on, and my 2 aunts who don't knit said, "Are you going to get this finished?" I'm hoping. 3 hours later, I have like that much done. They're going, "You better go fast," and they're teasing me. This is just a very basic pattern called Be Loving Remixed, and yep, by Melissa Simpson. Over the holidays, I got to watch a DVD Barbara Walker. She really made her mark on knitting many years ago. She said that she tried knitting in college. She didn't care for it. At 35, I think, she knitted just a basic stockinette sweater, and she found it very, very boring. And then she got obsessed, which apparently this is what she does. And she went to the Library of Congress, and she looked up every knitting stitch pattern that she could find and started compiling these. And then she created 1,000 knitting stitch patterns of her own. And it's amazing. And what she said is once you learn gauge, don't use a pattern. So, I mean, once you learn how many stitches to cast on for a chunky hat, you can just kind of, go kind of like ladies who would make recipes and you'd ask for it and they'd say, well, I just put like about a cup of this and pour in a little of that. After a while, you just kind of know. So I was also doing a crocheted beanie, and I think I may have left that at the shop. There's a yarn at the shop called Wistari. Ooh, that is not at all the color of this yarn. This yarn is like a gentle wheat color with beautiful colors, but wow, on the iPad it looks like a bright gold, and it's not at all. But I just did a row of single crochet and a row of double crochet. Found it interesting that just this end wants to do that. So I'm thinking about tassels, but that was fun. And then I had talked about crocheted slippers and talking about how fast you knit. You always tell people, don't compare yourself. I mean, you'll come up short every time. And there was a lady in the shop and she wanted to get a skein of yarn to do a baby sweater called the 5-hour sweater. And I said it took me a lot longer than 5 hours to do that sweater. And she said, not me. I timed myself. I thought, well, kudos to you. I'm happy for you. And today a woman came in the shop and she said, I'm looking for baby hats. And then I came to realize she meant already finished. And I don't normally sell that, but she said, well, the baby's already here. I need one now. And I said, it would only take maybe 2 hours to crochet a hat. And she gave me this look like, don't be condescending. And so I said, like one of those looks like maybe you, but not me. So I sold her a little hat, and one of the other ladies that was shopping said, oh, I didn't know these samples are for sale. And I said, no, usually they're not, only if someone is desperate. And the other lady said, and I'm desperate. So this was the slipper pattern by Krista Basta. Krista has a lot of neat patterns, both knitting and crochet. I think it might cost a few dollars. It's called Spa Slippers, and it calls for 2 strands of a worsted weight. And I decided to do a universal yarn called Nettle Fibers, Nettle, and it's a much richer blue than what you're seeing. And then Acacia, again, this is a much richer blue, tape construction yarn together. And I followed the small size, but it's a J hook, and it does knit up kind of tight. You do so many in the front loop, so many in the back, and you get this ridge. So my little grandson Tobin was over, and I'm realizing I got a long way to go. And I said, let me try this on your foot. And it was perfect, except to rip out like 2 rows. So after I bring that together, it's like the perfect size loafer for him. And I mean, he was excited about it. And not too many people get excited about my knitting. And then he goes, Grandma, can you make me another one of those? You betcha. He's so funny. The other day, my husband, I don't even know where it was in the house, pulled out this big wooden mallet. And I'm having fun with Tobin. And I don't know how many of you, because I could be older than you, years ago there was a comedian named Flip Wilson. And he would say, here comes the judge. Here comes the judge. The court's in session, so here comes the judge. And I was kind of saying this, and my little grandson's not really getting what the big deal is about this big, heavy old mallet. And he says, Grandma, why doesn't Grandpa throw this away? And this is the first time ever that I said, my husband is old, but I said, well, honey, Grandpa is old and he loves old things. And instantly he chirps, like you. Yep, I set myself up for that one. So I'm going to finish these for him. And then I might try a bulkier yarn or 2 strands of bulky yarn together, or just a yarn that has a lot more stretch and give. So more on the Spa slippers. And, you know, kids are pretty amazing. And I've said before, I love to hang out with kids. I took him to the Amish market and we were waiting for food for a long time. We ended up at the bouncy house. And of course, he's competing with the boys, showing off for the girls. But he said to me, Grandma, there's Paul. Well, I look, that's my husband's name, but I knew he didn't mean him. And I didn't know who he was talking about. And I just said, okay, well, say hi, but he stayed by my side. After a while, this man came up to us, a hefty guy, with a darling little 2-year-old granddaughter. And he said, he remembered me. We met them last summer at a playground. And all this time later, Tobin remembered. And he said his little granddaughter is so shy and never plays with any, but he said she played with him at the bouncy house. So this was the little 1, 2, 3 sweater that I knitted, and I'm still having trouble with that curling up, but I was designing a little hat. Let's see if to go with this. I don't know if you can see that pattern. It's supposed to be dandelions, but what I think is I waited too long to start the dandelions because I don't think a baby wants a slouch hat, or the brim could be flipped up. And then it would be okay, but I don't know if I like that. So I think this is going to be a do-over. I also had this yarn in my stash for a long time. It's a cotton yarn by Great Adirondack, and it's like 130 yards or something. And it just never looked right. And then I found this pattern called Easy Baby Socks by Kate Atherley. And from the moment I started the ribbing, this yarn just seemed perfect. I loved it. I loved the way it was striping. And even though it's cotton, it has nice stretch and give. And if you've never knitted socks, it's a good pattern to learn on. And so I already have another pair on the needles, and I have plenty left to do a baby hat. Plenty. So I also in the past had done the entrechat little baby jacket, and this is the bonnet. It is a separate pattern that you have to buy, and it was fun. This is what I had come to know as a bamboo stitch, and then that was the back. And the fun part for me was the I-cord knitted on edging was really fun. If you've never done that before, it's just one of those things of knitting that you get to do something you haven't done before, and it's fun. So that's the entrechat bonnet by Lisa Chemery. And let's see what, a little tip. I had read that when you do socks, because not all yarns have nylon, is to take a piece of thread, sewing thread that matches, I guess like a sewing thread that has polyester or nylon, and knit it in with the heel. I thought that was a really good tip. And then something else that I want to learn, Sally Melville's book, she has one, the knit stitch, the purl stitch. This is book 3, color, gives a lot of knitting instruction. And she has a section here. It's almost to me like doing Fair Isle floats, where you knit, weave in your ends as you're knitting. And there's a specific technique that you do. And if I can figure out the right way to do a podcast and show my hands, I'll try to do a video of that. This was also another book that I chanced upon, and a history of hand knitting. And you know, wedding shawls are nothing new. They've been around a long time. But this picture is the 19th century way that women held their needles and their yarn. Boy, look at those bony hands. Look at that woman. Oh, but the 19th century English manner of holding the needles adopted for drawing room knitting from the Young Ladies' Journal, 1884. So it's an interesting book, and more about that later. So we were talking about little children, and you know, I could really learn a lot from Tobin and watching him. We had a couple late in the year Christmas parties and a birthday party, and one thing I noticed, being the littlest, he's often ignored. So I'll hear him say, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," but brother, this, and he's just getting ignored because people are so much taller than him, and he's way down there, and he just bops along on his way. And then the older kids tend to ignore him, or they're not nice to him. They complain about him. He just kind of bops along and does his own thing. And he doesn't let it bother him when people aren't nice to him. And I could learn a lot from that. Just let it roll off, right? This is Fern Hat and Suzanne de Rosa. It came out right after Christmas, and it was free for a time being. And I thought for sure that this pattern was for DK Weight yarn. So I picked out a yarn called Camel and decided to do it in gray and black. And as I'm knitting it, it's fun. I'm doing a two-handed Fair Isle. I thought, you know, this hat's small. And then I looked at the pattern and it says Erin. And I thought, how did I mess this up? A DK is a thinner yarn, so I'm going to get a smaller hat. So somewhere, somehow, I looked at it wrong. And then a few days later, in my message box, I got an update for the Fern Hat DK weight. So there must be two different patterns, and I printed the wrong one. But it will just be a smaller hat. I am pretty close to being up at the tip, and this yarn is really soft, and it's going to be warm. So I had a gentleman in the shop today, and he was saying that he kept asking somebody that knows how to knit to make him hats and things, and even though he offered to pay, the answer was no. So he said, I have to learn to knit myself. We forget sometimes what it's like to be new and not to know anything. And even though I suggested that he get a beginner book, I think he had a limited amount to spend. And so he's my first customer of the day, and he's like, so if I want to make a hat, so what size needles do I get? And he has like a big needle, and I'm like, well, it all depends on the weight of the yarn. Well, what's worsted? What's DK? What's this? What's that? Well, what if I do this? And so he brings up, I think, a size 3 32-inch circular. Well, no, because so then he gets the 16-inch needles for the hat, and he says, am I going to be able to use these if I make mittens of the same yarn? And then when I told him he's going to need double points, he was frustrated. And then when I showed him an interchangeable set, he'd be like, well, that'd be great if I'd have $100. And I can really see how it is overwhelming. You just want to get a pair of needles and knit a hat, but you don't want to have to buy another pair of needles. And then what are these double points? And then somebody came in and said he was parked in a residential and he ran out and forgot the pattern I printed out for him. So I'm thinking he'll stop back. This is a book that was on my shop shelf, Hooked on Crochet by Candy Jensen, and I'm somewhat familiar with her. And it makes a distinction, includes step-by-step instructions for beginners. So I don't usually do this. I kind of pass over all the writing, but I decided that I would sit down and I would read this just like you would read a book. And it starts out by saying crochet is easy. You may look at the patterns and projects in this book and think to yourself that you won't be able to pull them off, but you know what? You can. You may have a misconception about what crochet looks like. Most people think of crochet as dowdy old doilies and ill-fitting sweaters that grandma forced you to wear as a child. You know what? I don't think I'd put that in the beginning of the book, because I don't think that most people think that. And she goes on to say that crochet is in all the major fashion magazines and the runways in New York and Paris, and it's fun and enjoyable. But then she gets into kind of some tricky waters. You have to make sure that when you know the craft, that you use basic ABCs with people who don't know the words. Like when my husband first retired and he started cooking, he would text me, what does fold in mean? What is simmer? What is, the difference between the teaspoon and the tablespoon? And all of these words, fold something in, what does that mean? And it was like a foreign language to him. So she goes on to say that crochet shouldn't be a dreaded chore. And again, I'm thinking, if you're trying to inspire a beginner, why would you say that? Crochet is very forgiving, and so am I. Now, people that are familiar with yarn and patterns, we know what very forgiving means. It means that some yarns you don't see mistakes, but a new person, they wouldn't know what forgiving means. And I read it and I just had trouble with it. Here she says, I love yarn, and as you get into yarn, you'll be a yarnophile. And she talks about the different types of yarn and says, of all the natural fibers, wool is the most common. And then she talks about different types of wool. Lamb's wool comes from the first shearing of the sheep. Merino sheep have long, soft coats, which makes merino wool expensive and coveted. I can't say that that's true, like merino is so expensive. I mean, if you're used to buying a cheaper acrylic yarn, but I just can't see that that's so. And she says that wool easily absorbs water. Well, if you don't really understand what that means, you might think that's bad. Oh no, I'm going to have a wool hat on and I'm going to be soaking wet. And that's not what it means. It means that acrylic will sop up water. So if you're out in the snow, you have a 100% acrylic hat, you'll be like a sponge. You'll be wet, you'll be dripping. But wool will hold up to 30% its weight in water, so you stay dry. But I don't know that somebody would understand what that means. And even though she said that the patterns are seen on runways and it's exciting, she continually uses the word vintage and retro, even though in the beginning she said we've advanced way beyond that. Now she's saying, you know, if you do this and that, you know, you can get some retro fringe, and she used the word vintage a lot. And she says that this scarf is completely updated, which means that the older colors weren't nice, but now it's a timeless treasure. I don't know, maybe I'm just being picky. And there's a if you want to prance around the cabana in heels, then that's your bikini. She does say it's only for sunbathing, because if you get your yarn really wet and you have a bikini on, it's gonna fall down. But here's an example, not your granny square. Also, the patterns kind of get sucked down in the middle of the book. So it's not your granny's square, meaning it's a newer version of the granny square. But when you look at it, it really is the same. So after saying it's new, it's really the same granny square. She's just saying it's done in new bright colors. This vintage look is easy to achieve, but she just got done saying this is not your granny square. So I probably wouldn't order it in, you know, I think I have a copy or two, but she uses words like this is funky, and then the next says it's beautiful, wear it over a vintage slip. It can be a comfortable little frock. And I'm thinking, who uses the word frock? I mean, anyway, enough, right? I don't mean to pick on her. I guess I have a more critical look at things, because, you know, if I'm going to order things, are they going to sell, and so forth. So let me see if there's anything else that I missed. I don't think so. I was just going to mention that somebody gave my husband this book for Christmas, and it has all kinds of little facts and things. And I think I knew this, but kids laugh 400 times a day and adults laugh 15. So I think we should really change that. The wedding, something borrowed, something new, something old, something blue. I thought that was really nice. Something old shows a continuance with the past. Something new shows optimism moving into the future. Something borrowed means borrowed happiness from friends and family, that you can depend on them. And something blue represents purity, love, and friendship. And to end, it says, what do these things have in common? A bullet-proof vest, fire escapes, windshield wipers, and laser printer. They were all invented by women. So I hope to be back in about 2 weeks, and hope to have some of these projects finished. And I did want to show you what one of my customers made. She got this yarn, SMC Select Tweed Deluxe, It's a nice soft yarn. It's a blend. It's not, I don't think it's being made anymore. It's a wool polyamide blend. And she had this pattern for a vest with a broad band down it, and the vest part called for an Aran weight yarn, and the big oh, I just lost it. The big band actually called for a fingering weight yarn, so we were able to put those together. And there she is, Nancy, wearing that. I think that's a good close up there. I thought it turned out really wonderful. Really, really good. So kudos to all my customers and all you out there that are making beautiful things. And I hope you're having a good January. We're supposed to get more snow in a few days, which should be fun. We also had a power outage, which that wasn't very fun. We were fortunate because we got our power back on at 3 p.m. The street behind us and the whole neighborhood going back didn't get their power until the next day, the next evening. And I said to my husband, well, do they need anything? And he said, no, I looked back there and I don't think nobody's home. And I laughed and said, they don't have any power. I don't think it's going to look like anybody's home. So keep those needles and hooks clicking and clacking, and shine, baby, shine. I'll see you the next time. Bye-bye.